Balance of Terror. Star Trek did its first Romulan episode twice. Balance of Terror remains one of the most iconic episodes of Star Trek, the original series, and Star Trek: Strange New Worlds revisited the first appearance of the Romulans with a new twist. In Star Trek, the original series, Season 1, Episode 14, Balance of Terror, Captain James T. Kirk, William Shatner, and the USS Enterprise face off against a Romulan ship that attacked United Federation of Planets outposts in the neutral zone. What follows is a tense game of cat and mouse between the Enterprise and the cloaked Romulan vessel. The Romulans would only appear in one more TOS episode, but they remain formidable enemies of the Federation. Distant cousins of the Vulcans, the Romulans returned in Star Trek: The Next Generation Season 1 and have continued to pop up in most Star Trek series. In the 24th century, long after leaving the Starship Enterprise behind, Ambassador Spock, Leonard Nimoy, began working to reunite the Romulan and Vulcan peoples, a difficult prospect that eventually came to pass long after Spock's death. Balance of Terror established the cunning and sometimes duplicitous nature of the Romulans, and Star Trek: Strange New Worlds revisited the events of the classic Star Trek, the original series episode, in its first season finale. As Captain Kirk officiates a wedding on board the USS Enterprise, a Romulan ship attacks a Federation outpost on the edge of the neutral zone. Although there had been a war between Earth and the Romulans a century before, no one in the Federation had actually seen what the Romulans looked like. The Romulan ship has a cloaking device that renders it invisible, but Kirk and the Enterprise conjure a means to track the enemy ship, eventually gaining access to a visual transmission. When Kirk and his crew first see the Romulans, they are shocked by their similar appearance to Vulcans. On the Enterprise bridge, L.T. Styles, Paul Comey, grows suspicious of Spock, even though Spock is just as surprised by the Romulans' appearance as everyone else. Spock surmises that the Romulans are an early offshoot of the Vulcans, suggesting that they have likely retained the warlike nature of the early Vulcans. Kirk orders the Enterprise to attack, and the two ships begin a deadly face-off. In the end, the Romulan commander, Mark Leonard, orders the destruction of his own ship after the Enterprise disables it, lamenting that he and Kirk have a lot in common. Star Trek: Strange New Worlds Season 1's finale, A Quality of Mercy, explores what would have happened had Captain Christopher Pike, Anson Mount, been in command of the Starship Enterprise rather than Kirk in Balance of Terror. After learning of his tragic fate in Star Trek: Discovery Season 2, Captain Pike began contemplating ways he could change his future. In Strange New Worlds: A Quality of Mercy, a future version of Admiral Pike visits his past self to warn him about what happens if he avoids his fateful accident. Captain Pike then finds himself in command of the Enterprise in an alternate future, facing the same problem Kirk did in Balance of Terror. After a brief battle, Pike negotiates a temporary ceasefire with the Romulan commander, Matthew McFadzean, who also wants to avoid war. One of the other Romulan officers, however, sees Pike's decision as weak and calls in reinforcements. The Romulans then attack the Enterprise, severely wounding Spock, and declare war on the Federation. Captain Pike returns to his own time, where he decides to accept his future. Not only does A Quality of Mercy offer a fascinating character study of Captain Pike, but it also serves as a brilliant callback to one of Star Trek, the original series' most iconic episodes. Balance of Terror, the 14th episode of Star Trek, the original series, TOS, remains one of the most iconic episodes in the franchise's history. Airing in 1966, it introduced the Romulans, a cold and calculating alien species, as formidable enemies to the United Federation of Planets. The Romulans, who would go on to become one of Star Trek's most complex and recurring villains, were portrayed as tacticians with a strong sense of honor, challenging the crew of the USS Enterprise in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. However, as impactful as this episode was, it wasn't the last time Star Trek explored the dynamics of this initial encounter. Decades later, Star Trek: The Next Generation, TNG, revisited the essence of Balance of Terror in a new episode, reworking the themes and ideas for a different generation of viewers. In many ways, Star Trek did its first Romulan episode twice, offering two interpretations of a classic story of tension, strategy, and the moral gray zones of war. The original Balance of Terror, written by Paul Schneider, Balance of Terror draws clear parallels to naval warfare, particularly submarine conflicts in World War II. The episode opens with the Enterprise investigating the destruction of several outposts along the neutral zone, a boundary separating the Federation from the Romulan Star Empire. This zone was established after a century-old war between the two powers, a war fought entirely by remote-controlled ships, meaning no human had ever seen a Romulan face-to-face. The mystery deepens when Captain James T. Kirk, William Shatner, and his crew discover that Romulan warships are cloaked, rendering them nearly invisible and setting up the tense tactical duel between Kirk and the Romulan commander, played by Mark Lenard. The brilliance of Balance of Terror lies not only in its suspenseful, slow-burn narrative, but also in its moral complexity. Kirk and the Romulan commander are portrayed as equals in many ways, both skilled, thoughtful, and duty-bound leaders doing what they believe is right for their respective peoples. The Romulan commander, in particular, is a deeply humanized villain, expressing regret over the war and weariness over the escalating violence. He doesn't want conflict, but bound by duty and honor, he engages in battle anyway. His parting words, acknowledging a sense of kinship with Kirk, "In another life, we might have been friends," underscore the episode's tragic undertones. Aside from the tension-filled action and ethical dilemmas, Balance of Terror also serves as a commentary on prejudice. The revelation that Romulans are nearly identical to Vulcans sparks xenophobic distrust among the crew, particularly in Lieutenant Stiles, whose family suffered in the Romulan War. His suspicion of Mr. Spock, the Vulcan science officer, speaks to the dangers of racial and cultural bias, an ongoing theme throughout Star Trek. Spock's calm, logical responses to Stiles' aggression emphasize the show's overarching message of tolerance and understanding, even amid wartime hysteria. Revisiting the Romulans in TNG, The Defector, fast forward to 1990, and Star Trek The Next Generation is well into its third season. The episode, The Defector, written by Ronald D. Moore, takes up the themes of Balance of Terror and adapts them for a new era. While the plot isn't an exact duplicate, the DNA of Balance of Terror is unmistakable, making The Defector something of a spiritual successor to the original Romulan encounter. In this episode, a Romulan defector named Admiral Yarrick, played by James Sloyan, seeks asylum on the USS Enterprise D, bringing with him information that the Romulans are preparing to launch a surprise attack on the Federation. Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, faces the daunting task of determining whether Yarrick is genuinely seeking peace or leading them into a trap. Like Balance of Terror, The Defector is a tense, character-driven drama centered on trust, honor, and deception. Admiral Yarrick, like the Romulan commander before him, is a layered, morally conflicted figure. He claims that his defection stems from a desire to prevent unnecessary bloodshed, yet his loyalty to the Romulan Empire is never in question. His motives are complicated, and the audience, like the crew of the Enterprise D, is kept guessing until the end. Where The Defector diverges from its predecessor is in the scale and stakes of the narrative. While Balance of Terror was primarily a small-scale cat-and-mouse game between two starships, The Defector operates on a broader geopolitical stage, reflecting the heightened complexity of interstellar diplomacy in the 24th century. Picard, unlike Kirk, is more of a diplomat than a warrior, and his approach to the Romulans is one of cautious pragmatism. He recognizes that the Romulans are duplicitous, but also understands that Admiral Yarrick's decision to defect carries the weight of genuine sacrifice.